the official radio station of the Church of Christ or Iglesia ni Cristo.
Don't underestimate
the power
of a single
conversation.
It could change your whole life.
INCRadio Chat Line.
conversations that matter.
Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of INCRadio Chat Line. I am host panelist. We're gonna have a conversation today about culture shock. If you saw like the title, of our topic, yes, that is what we'll be talking about. So if you're someone who might have experienced, you might have experienced culture shock. Maybe you moved to a different country, or Arnie. Then let me just kind of start us off here, because when I was looking at this topic, it occurred to me first, like the first thing that of course came to mind is like culture shock when it comes to like moving to like a different country. I feel like that's like kind of the biggest or I guess most common way that people experience culture shock. But I feel like there's more than that. There's like even moving to like a different city, or being moved to like a different class. Like say if you're still in school, being moved to like a different class where you don't know most of the other students.
Yeah, so I think with culture shock, it's not just moving from one country to another country and experiencing the different cultures, but I think it can also pertain to, let's say you move from the country to the city, or even from one state to another. There's different things and different ways that things are being done in those places. And so I think sometimes that could also be considered as a culture shock. It's just, I guess, something that's not your norm, but could be the norm somewhere else. And you just have to get used to that type of culture. I think that's that could be considered as culture shock also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Glad you mentioned like states, because I would say when we move from, well, first off, like when we moved from like the Philippines to the United States, or like the first place we moved to was like in Indiana, and yeah, like I would say that's like kind of like my first impression of what, like I know like my first impression of back in the Midwest. Like I just know that if I ever go to like maybe like California or New York, it's gonna be like wholly different from like what I do know from here in the Midwest. Even like in Texas, I feel like you guys are like a little bit more like different than us here in the Midwest.
And that's true, because sometimes even with culture shock, it's not just when you move somewhere. It could also be when you visit. For example, like you were talking about New York City, okay? I lived in California my whole life, and I thought, San Francisco was a busy city. But then when you go to New York City, it's like a whole nother world out there. It's so fast paced. Everyone's always moving. People are out and about all day long. At nighttime, you can go anywhere and still be able to eat food at night. But where I grew up in Sacramento, everything closes at about 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. No one's walking. You literally need a car to get around. And it was just so interesting to see in New York where, hey, first, it's busy. Second, you think of whatever food you can think of, they have it there. And then third, you didn't need to have a car. And it's actually better not to have a car. It was so much easier to get around through public transportation or walking to different places. And just experiencing, going to New York for the first time, to me, that was a culture shock, And I mean, I know you've been to Chicago, right?
Yeah, like I've been to, I've been to like the, I would say maybe the more, not suburban parts of like Chicago. Like that's the right way to call it. Like the more suburban parts of like Chicago. And then I've also been to the downtown area of Chicago, and yeah, like I would say, and I never been to New York, but I'm like imagining this. Is that like when you're in that kind of like downtown area? I feel like driving's kind of like not really the preferred way to get around. Like feel like, and especially in New York, they have their train system there that it's I'd say it's like very convenient to uh or more convenient to like travel that way instead of like driving. You know, but no, but yeah, like even if we're like even just going to like a different city, I feel like you already experienced culture shock. And we've been talking about it, but like what is culture shock? Like what would you count as a kind of like as a culture shock? It's like is it just different environment or you know?
I think I mean, to me, that's how I see it. Because, like you said, a person who comes here from a different country, um,
Mhm,
the way things are done here might be something that is shocking to them. And I think that's what you
mhm,
could consider a culture shock. And so I don't think culture shock is necessarily because of the different cultures. It could be just because of how things are done in those places. Like I
mhm,
said, like you said, you've been to Chicago and you've been to downtown, and that's totally different from the suburbs, right? But
mhm,
even like the city of Chicago, it's so different from New York, where in Chicago, I didn't think it was as crazy busy as it was in New York. But in New York, it was just like everyone's always on the go. And so just having those two different um, environments could be a shock. Just like if you lived in the countryside, and
mhm,
and you had all this land, and that's all you had was land. Like sometimes you don't even see your neighbors, right? For you just to
mhm.
leave that part and go somewhere that's really, really busy and everyone's bumping to each other, I think that would be a shock of some kind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do get like what you said, and like for me, like since you mentioned like moving to like a different country, and I mentioned earlier, like of course I came from like the Philippines, and we're used to commuting there, and like for I would say the 15 years that I lived there, that's kind of like what we've done. We never had a car, or I mean, we did kind of like before we moved, we had for like the last few years before we moved, to the States, we did have like our own like personal vehicle, but like for the most part, like me myself, I'm like very used to like commuting. So moving here and not seeing like 15 buses on the road. Not seeing 15 buses on the road. That was like a shock to me. It was like, wait, how do people get around? I remember thinking that like when we first started, like, how do people get around? It's like they just drive, they just drive everywhere. Yeah.
And it's funny you mentioned that, because when I've lived in the States my whole life, but there
Mhm,
was a point in my time, a point in my life where I think I was just getting tired of the States. So I
mhm,
decided to move to the Philippines for about I ended up living there for about 2 years, and
oh,
as an adult already. And so going there, that was a big culture shock, because like you said, you have public transportation everywhere. The
mhm.
streets are so crowded, where they have 4 lanes but they make it into 6 lanes, right?
Yeah,
That was a big shock to me, because I'm here in a taxi, I'm holding on to everything I could hold on to, because I'm so scared. I feel like someone's going to hit us, or we're going to hit someone, because everyone's just not staying in their own
yeah,
lane. That was a big shock to me.
yeah. That and it's like there, it's like normal to like honk at like people. It's kind of like it's a way of communicating almost.
Yeah, but you can't do that here. You
Yeah,
honk at
here
somebody
it's
here, they're going to
yeah.
get road rage.
Yeah, here it's perceived as rude, but like, in the Philippines, it's just like that's just normal. This is like how people communicate. It's like, oh, I'm behind you, or oh, I'm gonna, like I'm in your lane. I'm in your lane. Just letting it's like how people like communicate, I guess, or
Yeah.
how cars like communicate there.
See, but and then not only that, in when I moved to the Philippines and I was meeting people, they had no sense of personal space where they'll be just right in front of you talking to you. And I'm used to talking to people at a distance, right? And I
Mhm.
know they weren't doing it like, for any
On
bad
purpose, yeah.
reason, but
Or
just the
just
fact
to
that
make
they're
you
just,
uncomfortable, right?
yeah, they're just like right there in front of you. And I'm like, trying to step back, but they keep getting closer. And so it wasn't until I lived there for a longer period of time where I understood, and also over there, people like to hold hands. It didn't matter if
Mhm.
you were boyfriend, girlfriend, it didn't matter if we were just friends or whatever. Everyone in the Philippines liked to hold hands. And I wasn't used to that here in the States. Like I would never hold my friend's hand. Maybe
Mhm.
the little kids, you would hold their hand and go places, but just like your regular friends, that's not like something you do.
I guess it's like kind of like when you're and this is like say like when you're in the mall, like, and there's a lot of like, especially during vacations, there's going to be like a flood of like people. So like it's kind of become sort of just this thing that you do just to not lose your friends while you're like walking around like the
Oh yeah.
city or like
No,
the
I get
malls,
that part. Yeah. And
Mm.
you know what? Tony had put something in the chat where she said different aspects of culture shock is food. And that
Mm-hmm.
was one of the things I noticed too when I first moved to the Philippines. So, when you go to the open markets, you see all these meat just hanging everywhere. And my thing is, why is it not in a freezer? Because, here in the US, all the meat is in a freezer or
It's
else
fun.
it's going to
Yeah.
go bad. But over there in the markets, they're just hanging everywhere. And so I never bought meat in the market because I'm thinking it's not in the freezer. So I
Yeah,
don't
it's
know.
not. I would say it's like more common there to see it, like see like the produce just straight up like just on ice than it is to see it like on a like kind of like on a styrofoam with like plastic like over it. Like you see that kind of like in the maybe like the little bit like fancier places, but like the most, especially the one you go to, it's like the wet market. The wet market, like it's usually just like it's on ice, or
No,
like you said, it's like it's hanging on
some of them were not
on
even
a.
on ice. It was just
Mhm.
literally hanging there. That's why I was shocked. And I'm like, how long have these meats been out? And did it go bad? Because us, if it's not in the
Mhm.
refrigerator and the freezer, I wouldn't even try cooking it.
It's common. They said eat the steak well done in the Philippines, but yeah, it's like I would say especially in the Philippines, yeah, like I would say cook your steaks like really well. Tony mentioned clothing as well. Well, as well as a big aspect, which I mean, don't I don't think I've noticed that like too much. I mean, definitely if you're coming from like someplace that's like warmer, going to a place that's like colder, like I feel like the fashion is a little bit different in the sense that like in the colder place, the colder place that you're moving to, like people would like let's say in terms of fashion, people would also consider like jackets, right? Because jackets are an essential. You kind of like, and you kind of make it match like your outfit. But if you're coming from like a warmer place, you probably used to like short sleeves, not really wearing a jacket over your like over your shirts. So I guess so. I guess there is that aspect to it as well.
See,
But
for me, I don't notice like the clothing differently because I'm not a fashionista. Like I don't go with the trends. I wear whatever's comfortable. But I did notice like when I went to Japan, even if they're just going out to run errands, they're dressed up. They're not
Mhm.
they're not just like in leggings and a t-shirt. They're actually dressed up and they're just going to the grocery store or they're just running like some type of errand. And I was really surprised, but I thought it was neat, and it
Mhm.
was different, but I got shocked with that because when I went to Japan the first time, it was very hot, and I'm here just wearing tank tops and shorts, but I guess that's kind of frowned upon when you're in Japan. And so I had to try to adjust, to their culture so that I don't offend anybody. And so that's something else when it comes to clothing. For me, it's not really like the fashion sense, but more of what the country does, like, how they see
Mm-hmm.
clothing.
I mean, I would say that's like something I also like noticed when we first moved here. You like this for us before we moved here, and like I feel like relating to like what you said about like the culture there in Japan and I would say in the Philippines and like maybe in that part of the world, right? There's kind of like this culture of like you have your home clothes and then you have your going out clothes, and there's like those two are like in separate like piles. Like you have your good shirts here, your maybe not so good shirts here, and like your tank tops. They're all in the home clothes. You don't wear those outside unless you're unless you're like just a kid and you're going out to play with your friends, then you can wear that. But
Well,
if you're
I'm going to have to disagree with you on that now
mm,
because, I worked at the airport, and people
mm,
nowadays, when they come to the airport to travel, they're in their pajamas, in their furry slippers, and shower caps, which is supposed to be like you said, your home clothes, right? Or
mm,
that's supposed to be something you wear to go to bed. But yet now they're going out in public, wearing this stuff. And I remember my nephew also, he had this phase where he would wear his pajama pants to school. And I'm like, Mason, what are you doing? Those are pajamas. He goes, no, auntie, everyone's wearing it. And I'm like,
mm.
okay, I don't know.
I know it's become sort of like a fan. Are you talking about the ones that kind of look like a flannel shirt with like the
Yes, but they're
squares on
actual
them? Yeah,
pajamas. It's not
yeah.
even the flannel. It's just pajamas.
No, I know it's like sort of like become sort of like a fashion trend, like comfort, like comfort. I mean, I do understand it, like at an airport, especially if you're gonna be sitting on a plane, which that was my mistake. This whole like when I flew back to the Philippines for my brother's wedding, I don't know why I did this. I wore one of my good shirts from like my going out clothes. I wore two sets of jackets and I wore jeans. Which I feel like that was like my biggest mistake because I was gonna be sitting on a plane for like 21 hours.
No, and
Jeans
see,
were not the ideal. the
no,
ideal
and I
fashion.
agree with you. For me, I do when I fly, I try to wear
Mm,
comfortable clothing, but I would
mm.
not ever wear
Or pajamas.
pajamas and shower caps and my furry
Mm.
slippers that you wear at home. That's like home clothes. That's not
But
going
yeah,
out in
like
the public.
yeah, like I like I feel like that was like a shock to me, like seeing, especially first like the first few times we went to Walmart and just seeing people like in their pajamas and like yeah, like they have their slippers pajamas. And it's like well like that's really what you're wearing. And I'm wearing I'm wearing my fancy clothes. I mean not fancy as in like formal, like still casual. But like I'm talking about like I'm wearing like the good shirts, I'm wearing like my good jackets, I'm wearing jeans, I'm wearing like my good shoes. And it's like
Yeah.
I
So
would say now I've
for
adapted to it.
me, um,
Mm-hmm.
attire is attire. You have to wear something that is appropriate depending on where you're going, right? But yeah, but for me, like I said, I want to feel comfortable also. But
Mm-hmm.
with another thing, I think with culture shock, like what was your experience? Like name me something specific that really shocked you from when you left the Philippines and got to America. Because usually people in the Philippines they have this perception of what America is supposed to be like, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what was a shock to you when you first moved to the US?
Oh, like thank you for reminding me of that. Like, 'cause I was thinking of it like earlier, and like this is me. Like when we were like back in the Philippines, and like I have an uncle like in Canada. My uncle and his family they're in Canada, and I know for a lot of like Filipinos back home, like we we had this idea that, oh, they're earning, they're earning, like what they're earning is in dollars, and if you don't know like the conversion, I think like $1 is like 50 or 50 something pesos like in the Philippines. So that's like, if you convert it, that's like, it feels like a lot. And something that I don't think we could really consider as much is that, yes, they earn, like if you're working here, you're earning dollars, but you're also spending dollars. So that's like something I didn't consider back then. It's like, oh, if like I was thinking, if I work there, then I'm going to be rich. Just like I say, what's like kind of like average like salary here? Like say maybe like 2,000, maybe like in a week, or 2 weeks, in 2 weeks. I feel like I'm basing it on like what my experience was, like 1,000, like let's say in 2 weeks. So if you convert that to like pesos, that sounds like a lot. But if you're here and you're spending at, like paying bills, groceries and stuff, that's not really that much. And I think that's something that we didn't consider when we were back home. And the advice that someone gave to us is to like, they told us when we were first, when we were here, we were hesitant to buy groceries. That's what we were doing, is we were converting everything to like pesos. Like let's say we were buying eggs, and it's like, let's say like $1 or something. It's like $1 or something. And we were converting, it's like this 12,000 eggs is like 52 pesos. That sounds like expensive, you know.
Yeah. See,
Yeah.
and you can't do that. Like
Mhm.
when you're going to a third world country, you can convert all you want because you're going to say, "Oh my goodness, this is so cheap." Like so every time,
Mhm.
like when I go to the Philippines or when I went to Bangkok, I was converting and I was getting excited because I'm like, "Oh, I could never buy this in the US, but I could buy it all here, right?" And so
Mhm.
and so like you said, you can't convert and compare it to pesos when you're in the States because then you're never gonna buy anything.
Yeah, yeah, we were being like really careful, like I would say too careful with our money, because we were converting, yeah, we were converting everything to like dollars, even like the bills, like so, like even when the electricity bill, let's say, it's like it's not too bad, like in dollars. Because we were converting it in into like Philippine pesos, which it feels like it's a lot more. And we're like, okay, we need to cut on on like lights, like let's try not to use lights too much, let's try not to watch TV too much, like if your laptop's like fully charged, unplug it right away so that you're not consuming like too much electricity. And we weren't like like we I feel like, and think, if you're like like you're moving from, let's say, a third world country to like the United States, I feel like you would kind of have sort of like that mentality. I feel like, yeah, like when you mentioned earlier, like you were traveling to other countries, you were also converting. So I feel like that's kind of like a universal like experience. And we have someone joining us. I don't know if he's ready to talk
Yeah,
about
but
culture
but the
shock.
whole other thing about converting is like when I moved from California to move to Texas, right?
Mhm.
And I saw how cheap gas was, and I saw, oh, there's no state tax, so whatever money I'm making, I'm actually taking home, except for the federal tax that they take out, right? It got
Mhm.
me excited, and I'm like, ooh, it's not too bad, I guess. But even just like I said, moving from state to state, not just about the cost of living to me, I got shocked when I moved to Texas because in California, you have to be very cautious. You got to lock your doors. You have to make sure it's like, even if you're walking at night, you're looking around to make sure there's like, nobody coming after you, right? But then when I
Mhm.
moved here to Texas, I was freaking out. I was locking my doors all the time and, being very cautious. But then after a while of living here, I realized it's not like that here. There were times where I would forget to lock my door and I'm like, oh, it's okay because we're in Texas. But I'm like, I could never do this in California.
Not
Or
Houston.
uh, Well, no, not Houston. I would not do that in Houston. But in Fort Worth, or at least the area that I live in, I feel safe that even if I forget to lock the door and I notice it like the next day, I'm not scared. And there was even one time I went away for like 5 days. And when I came home, I realized, oh no, I never locked my door. But I wasn't worried. But Nate, where did you come
Mhm.
from? You said you came from Florida, right?
Actually, before Florida, I lived in Hawaii for a bit. So there was a bit of a culture shock coming from Hawaii, which is like, I don't know, if happiness were an island, like everyone's happy, like all the time. And then you come to Florida, the deep south. So there was a bit of a culture shock when I moved there. People weren't as happy, I guess you could say. And then I moved to Texas. Texas easily has the strongest personality and cultural identity out of all the states that I've been to. Even the cities themselves, they have their own strong identities. Like you go to Austin and you're like, I'm not even in Texas anymore. So
And you're in the same state.
yeah, you're still in the same state. But yeah, one thought I had about culture is like I don't think a lot of people try to look back at what shaped the culture because it didn't just materialize out of nowhere. It had to come from somewhere. And like with Texas, that came from, being kind of out in the frontier. At first, it was the frontier of Mexico because Texas used to be a part of Mexico, and then it switched over to it actually became its own country for a little bit before joining the United States. So that's kind of where the culture, of Texas came from. And I imagine that
Mhm.
applies everywhere else. Like the same with the Philippines. It's really hot there, like all year
Yeah.
round. So it just makes sense why people would dress a certain way, and it'd be a little more laid back in how they would dress everywhere, versus I don't know what to say about Texas. I mean, Texas is all over the place too. If you ever wonder why do people wear like long pants and long sleeves in Texas, even in summer, you just wait till that sun goes down and the mosquitoes come out. It's like that's why. They're really fast. Like, nope, don't wear shorts in Texas
and
when
and
the
not
when the
just
sun goes
that,
down.
it could be summertime and you walk out, all of a sudden you got thunderstorms and hailstorms just out of nowhere. So it's like you got to be prepared no matter what.
Yeah, and one of the shocks, another shock too, when I moved to Texas was like, why does everyone like so obsessed with trucks out here in Texas? And I always grew up like kind of looking down on trucks. Like, why would anyone need a truck? Like, if you weren't
Mhm.
actively like working and needing to haul anything, like, and full
And now,
disclosure, I own a truck now, so
yeah, now you got a truck.
spoiler alert. But after I moved here and I got my first truck because like I had to move some stuff, I'm like, it'd be convenient if I could, get a truck. And this was when cars were still, really cheap. I was like,
Mhm.
this thing is great. Like, why did I hate on this for so long? Like, whenever I want to go anywhere, just throw everything in the back and just go and not have to, think twice about anything. If I want to go pick something up, yeah, just go and get it. Well, also in Houston, the flooding. So that may be another reason why trucks are very prevalent. But
Mhm.
then, you think about like, why was I so judgy about that in the first place? Like judging a culture when there's reasons why they have it. Of course, with Texas, there's a deep like agricultural aspect to why
Mhm.
trucks would be very prevalent here, and it would just kind of bleed into all aspects of life here. So even people who aren't working on the farm are gonna want trucks
Well, because
and
they
cowboys
have to haul their
everywhere.
their saddles and everything, right? You can't put that in a small car. You need your saddles and all the other stuff you need for your cattle.
All
But
right, contrary to popular belief, we don't all own a saddle and ride around horseback in Hawaii.
I would say though, like when you were talking about trucks, I thought you were gonna mention because there's like maybe like a lot of like dirt roads. I feel like trucks would be better on like dirt roads than like cars.
And that would make sense too. I mean, I live in the city, so I rarely come across a dirt road, but yeah.
Mhm.
But one of the things that also shocked me here, moving to Texas, is how everyone, hey sweetie or sugar, or it's like the Southern charm. I was not used to that because in California, they don't got time for that. You just got to get your point across, straight to the point, matter of fact kind of a thing. But here, they're just so polite. When I teach classes and I have students that are older than me, they're still calling me ma'am or miss. And I'm like, oh no, don't call me that. Just call me Arnie, right? But they're just so polite. And it's so different compared to what I left in California, where, sometimes people don't even acknowledge you. And so to me, that was a culture shock, but I think that was a good shock because I don't think all shocks are bad.
And you know what? The reason why I moved to Texas was because I became a teacher. And even in the classroom, and I wasn't even in the best school, the children were still very respectful in at least how
Yes.
they would speak. They would still say yes, sir, yes, ma'am, whenever
Yes.
they would talk to you. Now, everything else, it may be horrible, but they at least said sir.
Mm-hmm. No,
So
that's
yeah,
so
that
true.
is a cultural thing here. Yeah.
I would say, since you mentioned like the sir, ma'am thing, I feel like when we first moved here, and I was still learning to, kind of like talk, like talk American, is that the right word to use? Like something that I struggled like getting rid of was saying "Paul" and like after my sentences, especially if I'm speaking to like people, and I always get like weird looks because I will always end my sentences with "Paul," and they don't know what "Paul" means.
Yeah.
like like they're like, wait, what?
One for English speaking audiences, Paul is just like it's almost like a form of sir or ma'am. It's just
Like
a very
you
respectful
add
way
it.
to sprinkle onto a sentence, right?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a sentence enhancer. It's a sentence enhancer. No, yeah, it's a sentence enhancer. You like if you're talking to like maybe your boss at work, someone who's like kind of like higher up on you at work, or you're talking to someone older than you. You usually use that. You usually use "po" or like "opo" if you mean to say like yes, like respectful. But yeah, we don't have an equivalent of that here, like in English. So it like I did struggle of getting rid of that, and I would always slip up, like and use like when I'm just like at a store or at a restaurant. They hand me my food and they're like, thank you, Paul. I'm like, oh wait, no. What's this supposed to say? I was like, oh, what's supposed to say that? But yeah, there's also those like kind of like I guess like slight differences that that you it would shock you. Like for me, like when you're saying like sir, ma'am, and like things like that, I feel like that wouldn't have shocked me as much because like in the Philippines, that's also kind of like a thing. Like when you're referring to like a teacher, or you're referring to and even just like someone older than you, you might use that if you're speaking in English and you can't really use spot. Like you would say like sir, ma'am, like if when you're addressing someone. But yeah,
You know,
just a little caveat there.
one thought I had about culture shock is if you go through the stages of like mass technology, especially in the 20th century. So go before the time of TV. If you were to go to
Mhm.
another country, you'd be in complete culture shock because maybe you might have read something in a book, but there's no way a book can, help with the visual of what to expect. And then, of course, TV came out, travel TV shows came out. You can get an idea of what a culture is like if you were to go somewhere else. But I think even more so nowadays with like the internet and now with social media, like I think culture shock isn't going to be as big of a thing as it used to be. Because I remember going to the Philippines in the early ish 90s, and it was a big culture shock for me. Just everything that I did and behaved in the States was like, no, you don't do that here, in the Philippines. And I knew that I think the big aha moment, like, whoa, this is different, was like I get to the house that we're staying at, and I'm like, oh, it's 4 p.m. Power Rangers is on. So I go and turn on the TV on channel 4, and I'm like, what is this? Where's Power Rangers? And they're like, what are you talking about? And that's when I realized, like, oh, like TV's not universal everywhere. Every country is probably going to have its own like
Mhm.
TV show and TV network and all that. And that was a big
Like
shock to me.
cartoons, if you're looking for cartoons, like it only shows on like weekends, like Saturday, Sunday, because that's like the only time the kids are home. Like Monday to through Friday, it's like in the Philippines, like Monday through Friday, most of the shows that you'll catch like in like the morning and the afternoon, it's like drama series
Right.
that
Well, and
moms
now
would
with
most likely have in the
YouTube,
background. Mhm.
now with YouTube, you can actually watch the shows of other cultures,
Mhm.
or you can, keep tabs of what's popular in other cultures. So
Yeah, and
I think,
I think that's very helpful. And because when for me, when I travel, I actually do research on the countries that I'm going to. So at least I know what their norms are and what they practice, what they look down upon, what they appreciate.
Mhm.
So then that way when I go to that country, I won't stick out like a sore thumb. But then also to show that, respect for that country, because you don't know what's going to happen to you when you're there. You're not in the US with the US laws, right? They have their own laws
Mhm.
there, and if you don't abide by it, then they'll arrest you, they'll do whatever they want to do with you. And so I always make it a point to look at the different cultures, and I think that's how I learned the different cultures, like going to Japan a few times, learning, like you don't just hand them things with one hand. That's very disrespectful, where you have to hand things to them with two hands, because that's the way they feel is respectful, right? But here in the US, just one hand is good enough, right?
I'm laughing when you said that earlier. Because it made me think of like and this like I've seen like videos like online of like people going like they're in another country and they're going like I'm an American citizen. It's like the thing about that the thing about that is like you're not in America right now. So your citizenship doesn't really kind of like mean anything in this country. So you would also you would have to like adapt like how they do things there in that country. And I feel like Caribbean do like I've never been to another country, but like when we were first moving into America, I did look up like what people consider like rude, so I don't accidentally do it. And I know like staring at people on the end of the cycle, staring at people like on the street. I know that's like I figured out. Oh, that's rude. You're not supposed to do that. Like I know back home, if you're like staring at that direction, there's like 50 other people, so they don't really care if you're staring at their direction. They're just like, like they could be staring at me, they could be staring at someone behind me, someone else. But here, where there's not really, or I guess here in the Midwest, where there's not really like a huge traffic of people. If you're staring at someone's direction, I feel like they're more likely to assume that you are staring at them. And like when I was like researching, like, okay, what do people consider rude? That's like, oh, staring. I guess like gotta curb that attitude of like looking at people, especially for me who like the growing up in the Philippines, I've only seen Filipinos. like seeing Americans for me was like it was this sort of like it was like seeing like like you get kind of you're like it's like looking at something rare. So you're like I had this tendency to kind of just stare because like stare in amazement. It's like I don't see you like I don't see like someone like you that often. But I mean, I would say I'm used to it now. I'm used to it now. Like I don't really kind of stare anymore. But like it's also kind of good if you're going to like a different country to kind of look up like what they consider rude, what you shouldn't do, what you should do. Like what Arnie said, if you're handing them like in Japan, if you're handing people something, don't just do it one. Yeah.
Tony had put in the chat, she asked, have you ever experienced culture shock via relationships between your friends
Um,
and significant others or family? And so there was, growing up, because even though we lived in America, our parents raised us with the Filipino traditions. And so when I would go to my friends' houses, I remember they were non-Filipinos. And every time I would go into their house, I would take off my shoes and they would look at me like I was crazy because that's not something that they do, right? So I had to get used to that. So just the whole getting used to that one, I thought that was like a culture shock. And then also when I was in the Philippines, I dated somebody over there, and they were, here in the US, I'm used to being independent, where, if you're going to date someone, you're co-equals and all that stuff, right? But like in the Philippines, they're like, no, 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 we'll do this, we'll do that, and I'm like, yeah, no, I can't do that. I still have to have a say. And so that was a big culture shock for me because I can't have a man tell me what to do. And so that was kind of difficult with that type of relationship. What about you, Nate? Anything with relationships that was a culture shock to you?
Well, my wife, when we met, she I would say more of a lack of a culture shock, because she graduated from the Philippines and then she moved to Houston. That's where I met her. We met at church, actually. And I don't know, it was like she knew a lot of the music, that was very popular here. She spoke English better than me.
Wait,
So
how's that possible? Because you can't even speak Tagalog. English is all you know.
exactly. So English is my first language, barely. But yeah, I think though she kept up, with what the pop culture is here in the States. And I know in the Philippines, especially nowadays with, MTV is a big thing there. If you go over there, they have MTV, and they follow a lot of the same things we have. And then of course the internet has opened up access to everything. And so it was more of a lack of a culture shock, I would say. So um there's just maybe a few things culturally that were different, but nothing really major.
Yeah, and I think also for me because when I moved to the Philippines, my dad's side is actually Chinese. And so his brothers, they did all they did the whole Chinese New Year. They believed in, what in the different things. And to me that was a shock because, you know, that's not the things that we practice, or that was not the things that we even acknowledged. And so I think even with that one, with just your family members, sometimes there could be kind of a shock, especially if you've not lived with them and you just met them, and then all of a sudden, you learn about the different things. I thought that was a little bit of a shock also.
Well, also here in the States in general, like culture isn't as strict, and it's not as strictly enforced.
Yeah.
It's not like in the Philippines, where I guess if you go against the culture, you might have some uh pushback from society in general, but not really here. Especially since there are already a lot of cultures in the United States. I mean, just in Texas, there's towns that were settled by all the different like Europeans, and they all have their own culture. So you can see why, though, as here in the States, as time goes on, like you really can't be that strict about trying to have just one culture here, because there's just so many. I
Yeah,
mean, I
because
can
it's a
only
mix of
imagine
cultures.
like New York City. New York City is probably like one of the big ones. Although everyone, from what I hear, about New York City, every distinct culture is very strong
Oh
there, but they all
yes.
get along. Yeah,
Yes. And if you've ever
get
met
along.
people, if you've ever met like real New Yorkers, they do, they have very strong personalities. And sometimes even just the way they talk, it seems like they're angry, but they're not. That's just how they talk. And so things like that, I think getting used to things like that is what it's kind of interesting.
I feel like that's my family's culture, Army. Like like when we're talking, people look at us because we sound like we're yelling at each other, but no, we're just talking. Even it's like sometimes we're just having fun. we're just having fun, and our voices just kind of. And I don't know if you're noticing it in me now, because I've been trying to control my volume. I know it's like kind of like it's a little bit evening here, so so I'm trying to like control my volume. But when we get excited, like in my family, when we get excited, we tend to yell. I don't know why, and the more we get excited, the louder we get. And I know sometimes we get like weird looks for it because people think we're fighting. We are not. We're not. That's
I think
just
it's
how
a
we
lot.
are when we have fun.
I actually think that's a lot more common in a lot of cultures than you
Yeah.
would think. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
even in Italy, they're like that. There's one thing that Melanie did type out that I thought was interesting. He says, it seems like it's normal in the States for young adults to move out and live on their own, whereas in the Philippines, you typically move out when you get married.
Yeah.
So I must say, I think this was a culture shock to my parents because I had three older siblings and none of them ever moved out of the house, right? And like she said, but for me, because I was the independent one, I moved out like at a pretty young age, to go off to college and then not even go
Mhm.
back home. And so to them, they were shocked because, like I said, with the Filipino culture, you don't leave home until you're married, right?
Mhm.
How
Well,
was that in your family, Nate?
I
Oh.
grew up Filipino American, so my dad is white American from Massachusetts. My mom's from the Philippines, and I feel like I did both because I stayed at home for college, and I was fully intent actually on staying at home to find a job, but I couldn't, and that was the only time I actually moved out to Texas was when I couldn't find work after college. So it was kind of a little bit of a combination of both.
See, I don't know. I was just eager to move out of the house. And the thing was I didn't even think I could do it because everyone I had grown up with or everyone ahead of me, like not even just my siblings, but my friends, they all didn't leave home until they got married. And I'm like, I am not getting married just to move out of the house, right? And
I,
so that was a shock to my parents.
I would say though, this is something I've noticed. I don't know, like just on the extent that I've seen in social media. So don't quote me on this, but just on the extent I noticed, I feel like we're actually now seeing a sort of like merge in like different like cultures. Because what Melon said and what you both said about like uh where like kids like moving out, right? Like it's and I think we're seeing kind of like more so now that like the children are kind of like they're staying with their parents even in their like adulthood. Like, and I know some people who like are still with their parents, like even like they're already working, they're already earning, and they're still like living with their parents because just financially it's just more financially sound. Like they don't really have a reason to move out unless unless they get married. And like even the like taking off your shoes thing, I feel like more so now, like just on the houses I've been, like people take off their shoes more often now. So I feel like we're seeing sort of like a merge of like different like cultures with like our kind of like culture here also in the States. So I don't know, just like those just like kind of like an interesting caveat, like I noticed, like when you guys mentioned the thing about about moving out with it. But for me, I feel like I would still plan on doing. I don't know if I have a reason to, if I have a reason to.
And when we talk about culture shock, like just the US alone, we're one country, yet we've got so many different cultures and so many different things. I remember I went to Lamont in Iowa, which is a
Mhm.
little town. Like it is small where everyone who's walking around, everyone knows who each other is and everything. That was a
Mhm.
big shock to me because I'm walking down the street with my friend and they're saying hi to him. And I'm like, they know you? He goes, oh, everybody here knows each other. And then when we went out with him and his wife, and I was like, are you not going to lock the door? They're like, oh, no, no, no. Nobody ever locks the door. Plus, the kids need to get home. And I'm like, who's going to watch the kids? They're like, no, 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 they'll be
Mhm.
fine. And I'm like, okay, we can't do this in California. So that was a big shock to me. But, like I said, it's still part of the US. yet just different regions of the area has different things that's just culturally different, even though they're all
Mm.
Americans, you know?
Oh, that brought up like something in my memory of like we were talking to a nurse, and she said, because she was from Alaska, and she said that people usually don't lock their cars there, just in case someone needs to jump in your car, in case there's a moose or they're stuck out in the cold and they need to warm up. Like it's customary, I guess, to like leave your car unlocked, just in case like a wild animal or they're out in the cold. Like it's customary to do that.
All right,
See,
And
I have to ask real quick. Where you guys were growing up, when you went to get gas, did you have to pay first or no?
in the Philippines, yes. And there was someone pumping the gas for you.
Right.
Like like here you pump the gas yourself. Like
What
here
about
in
in
the Philippines, yeah.
California? Did you have to pay first? Do you remember?
well, back in the Stone Age, I remember they used to pump your gas first and then you would pay.
Yeah.
But when I finally started driving, the Stone Age had passed and I had to pay first and then get gas. But I do remember a time where you would get gas first and then pay after.
Mhm.
See, that was my small town that I grew up in Florida. It was like that for the longest time. It was you would get your gas first and then you would pay. Like it was unheard of to just fill your car up and then drive off. Well,
And
what happened was one hurricane had hit, and then there was a bunch of it didn't hit us, it hit Louisiana, and a bunch of people from Louisiana came to Florida, and they took advantage of that. They were pumping lots of gas and then just taking off without
see,
paying,
mm-mm,
and it changed just like that. We no
Mhm.
longer had that in our community. So there's that too. Like cultures can change if someone decides to take advantage of it. Um, just like you guys were talking about how some places you didn't have to lock your doors. Like I remember driving into town in Florida and the car would be unlocked and the windows would be down too. Like
mm-hmm,
just completely open and we never thought twice about it.
mm-hmm.
Not so much now because it's much more developed and people from out of state moved in and they don't exactly I guess share the
Follow
same
the
kind of
same.
like beach
Mhm.
culture that we had.
Mhm. So there's like I don't know, like there's definitely I feel like we kind of drifted. Just in terms of like going back into like those culture shock, and to kind of I guess end it off is that when and like we've talked about our experiences with culture shock, but let's say maybe someone is moving into your you're moving into your small town, your community. How do you kind of like help them get accustomed to like the culture? They will experience that shock. So how do you help them adapt?
Well,
I
you got to
think
give
for
them
me,
advice.
yeah,
I
give
mean,
give
Mhm.
them advice.
understand that, they're not going to know everything. So, just immediately off the top of my head, if you move here to Texas, don't assume that it's hot all the time. And if I know somebody is coming from, let's say, the Philippines and winter's coming, you'll remind them like, hey, don't forget to like, drip your faucets, but also say why. Because if you just tell someone, hey, it's cold, drip your faucets, they're gonna be like, why? I'm not gonna do that. So you also need to explain why people do, certain things in a certain area because there are reasons why cultures have adopted and do certain things.
Mhm.
Yeah, I didn't drip my water this winter and it froze.
Well, one thing I'll say to make you remember that a water bill is always cheaper than a plumber.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't burst. That was a good thing. It just froze and I couldn't have water in my bathroom, so I had to go use my guest bathroom because I couldn't do anything. But yeah. No, and that is what we do, right? If you know someone's coming, even like not even from a different country, even just from a different town or a different state, I like to let them know what it's like here. Of course, they have to see it for themselves also, but then I think also letting them know that if they have any questions or if they need help, that you're available. I think letting them know that, I think that's a big help, as opposed to just ignoring them and not helping them in any way. But even if you don't tell them every single little thing, as long as I think they know that you're there, I think that is helpful.
Like, yeah, like, like the just from the top of my head, yeah, patience, and then also like helping them, explain stuff to them, like this is why we do this, like this is why that's considered rude, this is why you should do this instead, and then yeah, like extending your help, especially if they're new to your your community, your town, your city, your state, whichever, or your country.
So when
uh,
you're in New York, you shouldn't ask to put pineapple on a pizza.
I would hope so. Yes. uh, we're at it. So thank you, Arnie, and of course, thank you to our live chat for joining us in this conversation about about culture shock. If you have more stories about culture shock and you want to revisit this topic, just let us know. We'll maybe do like a part two if you guys want as well. And if you have other ideas as well for topics you want to discuss, just let us know. But we will see you next week, and we do want to thank you again for joining us. We do hope that this has been a conversation that mattered to you. We'll see you again next Friday, same time, to talk about a different topic. Again, if you have ideas you want us to talk about, just let us know. We'll see you next week. Goodbye, everyone. Have a great weekend.